Brad, thanks for taking some time in what is a busy period of the pre-season. How excited are you from a football club point of view that things get underway finally on Friday against Richmond?
Yeah, we're really excited. We've had I know most teams say this, but a good prep to this point, and we've been quite a bit of change over the last, not just this year, the last couple of years with our list, and we had a really exciting draft period, which has really been 2 or 3 years in the making to try and position ourselves where we had a number of early picks. So to bring 5 quality players into the club as draftees was really exciting, and then it becomes how quickly we can gel as a team. And pretty simply for us, it was we were keen to get stuck into pre-season, and on the back of a lot of injuries and getting a few guys back, probably the thing that we knew going into this pre-season was that we were going to have half a dozen guys who were carryover injuries from last year. So, but outside of that, the guys who finished the season last year, either playing or pretty close to returning to playing, have had good blocks of pre-season.
What sort of tinkering have you done in terms of how you want to play in 2026?
Yeah, it's. I wish it was just tinkering. I mean, we've been in we're in a phase where we've just got to improve all aspects of our game. So it's prioritising some things over others, but I mean, really the short answer is we need to improve everything. But the challenge for us last year in that was just, every week looked different. We if we wanted to work on forward system, I mean, that's a challenge to do in season anyway. But when you're dealing with different personnel every week, it makes it near on impossible. I think we had one game where we had 50% of our forward line who were mid-season draftees. So, that makes it a fairly big challenge to work on synergy.
How do the Bombers play in terms of the speed on the ball? We've spoken to a lot of coaches on afl.com.au across the pre-season, and that's been a consistent. We want to get quicker, we want to move the ball faster. How does that materially work, and in practice, you guys over your summer?
Yeah, we're no different in terms of our training. We want to move the ball quicker. But I've been in this game long enough to know that most teams want to do that in the pre-season, and most teams improve that and do it pretty effectively. The challenge is once game starts, or the games start against genuine opposition, if one team's doing that really well, by definition, another team's being scored against really heavily. So, it tends to come back a little bit. But traditionally, the games at the start of the year, when the weather's good, the grounds are hard, it's pretty fast up and back. And the State of Origin's a pretty good example of that.
You said at the best and fairest you wanted to hit the ground sprinting, I think were your words. How fit is the group? Is it as fit as you've seen in your 4 pre-seasons here?
All the testing would suggest that. But again, that seems like a bit of a broken record for every club in the pre-season.
Train the house down.
Yeah, train the house down. Fitter than we've ever been. Multiple PBs, all those sorts of things. It's really how that fitness base translates into performance on field. But on all our numbers, we're improving, even though we're younger than we were. So, it's age and experience. Those things are just factual. You can't change those things. But certainly the numbers, our physiological numbers on the training track have been very pleasing.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because that has been part of the change over some with Matt Ennis coming in. Like, in terms of the actual running program, how is it different, or how does it look different?
Well, I think we've always, like every club, trained really hard, and particularly in the pre-season, long sessions. I mean, it's been a fundamental shift in terms of us wanting to replicate, at least meet, but probably exceed the demands of the game within our training sessions. And that comes, there's a fine balance between that, especially given our injury history. You've got to push to the line and sometimes pass the line in terms of what the game demands of you, while trying to keep everyone fit and available and injury free. So, but our philosophy has been that, if we're conservative and we just try and get everyone through, one, we won't prepare them for what the game demands of them, and two, we won't be fit enough, strong enough to be able to compete against the best.
There are probably some helpless moments at times in the second half of last year through that losing run, and the debutants, 15 of them across the course of the season, which sounds remarkable now you look back on it. What did you learn about coaching a group through that period, and even just being a senior coach in that sort of role under those circumstances?
Well, I mean, it was a huge challenge, but I mean, we you know, I learned a lot to be creative. I mean, Lockie Blackiston's a good example. We took him in the mid-season draft because we needed, ruck backup. We'd lost Sam Draper to a ruptured Achilles, Nick Bryan to an ACL. You know, we were exposing young Vigo Vicentini, very early on in his career. So we drafted Lockie Blackiston as a ruckman, and he played as a key back, a position he'd never played before in his footballing career. So, we had to be creative and really find ways to put a competitive team on the field each week. But I think the thing I like the most, in difficult circumstances, that the players didn't turn up their toes. They didn't give up. It was clearly challenging for us, but hopefully those difficult times will build resilience within our group for when we face difficult times again, because they're inevitable. But I think we'll be better prepared to take that on. Just hopefully it won't be a challenge in terms of player availability.
We'll get to some of the updates on those injured boys shortly. It was obviously a tumultuous off-season with Zach Merrett looking to head to Hawthorn through a trade. At the time, how shocked were you as that unfolded across those couple of weeks, and how did you deal with that from your position?
Well, I wouldn't say shocked is the word. I was probably just, to be honest, a little bit complacent in terms of, he contracted for 2 years, so it's, what's the issue here? It's he's a required player as our captain. There's nothing to talk about. So now clearly as time went on, there was plenty to talk about because everyone wanted to talk about it. But from our position, it was actually, if you look at the start of it, when it first came to light, to the end of it, not much changed. But in the middle, it was a bit of a circus. So I was very pleased with the club took a position and stuck to that position. But then I think the really important thing is, for us, what Zach's fully invested in the club. Like at times, he's a competitor. He wants to win. And we worked through all that, and now he's in a really good space mentally, and he's had a fantastic pre-season again. No surprises, he's been one of our best performers on the track. And so I was never concerned that Zach would come back and be anything other than a thorough professional in terms of the way he goes about his footy, and he's certainly done that.
Did you speak to him much throughout that trade window?
Well, through the trade window, yes, I did. And, it was probably a situation where it got to, played out publicly, and, we were talking very regularly, but it was, it was a really difficult situation for him because it was such a public issue. And it certainly would have been a lot easier if we could just not have it play out in public, but that's the way it did play out. But, he and I talk all the time. As I said, I was probably just a bit flippant in terms of, well, the club wants to keep him, he's required and he's contracted, so what's there to talk about?
What was your view on the Hawthorn offers over those last couple of days and how those conversations played out? Because as you say, this was the most significant storyline in the trade period, which is one of the most significant parts of the year. We understand the gravity of that. Yeah. What was your view on how those deals were put forward and those last couple of days?
Well, again, we've got a list management team. When you're talking about your captain and a player of Zach's calibre, it's more than just a list management decision. So clearly our president, our board got involved. So from my perspective, again, I'm sure whether people believe us or not, but we'd made our position clear that we weren't trading him. So, and as of 72 hours before the trade deadline, there hadn't even been an offer for him. So it was like there was nothing to talk about. But eventually the offer came through, but it was way too late. And as I said, we made our position clear and followed through on it.
What was the discussions like with Zach after that? Because obviously it was still in the off season. He returned to the club in November. Did you have a sit down and catch up? How did you play that from your position? Because a lot of these things get left to the senior coach to repair and work through.
Yeah, I think there's a bit of, even Zach's spoken about, it was a bit, how's this going to be received with his teammates? That was the most important thing for me, that Zach knew that, even publicly from the best and fairest onwards, that Zach knew how much we valued him, and if we didn't value him, we just would have traded him. So it was really important that we got the senior players, Zach, together, and as I said, he hit the ground running day one and just goes about his business. Now that was no surprise to me. So but we did have to have a number of discussions just to make sure that he was good, and we've spent quite a bit of time, and probably for both of us, we talked about the fact that let's never have a void in communication ever again, and even if it's longer than a day or two is too long, let's make sure that however you're feeling, the team's feeling, that we talk about it, and we've certainly followed through on that all pre-season.
Zach said last week that he'd be open to looking at contract extension talks, and there's been some preliminary discussions along the way through the last couple of months around that too. Does the club progress that, and how keen are you to have him here for the rest of his footy career?
Oh, well, I'm very keen to have him here. He's go down as one of the all-time great Essendon players, and I think if Zach and his management are open to and they want to talk about potentially extending Zach's tenure and making him a Bomber for life, then of course as a football club I think that would be something that we would definitely entertain. He's contracted for another couple of years, so I don't think it's massively urgent. But what is urgent is that we show Zach just how much we value him, and sometimes talk can be cheap, and long-term commitments. That's not talk, that's action. So that's certainly something that personally I'd be very keen to see happen.
How fierce does round one look now against the Hawks? It's always a fierce contest between Essendon and Hawthorn, but there's maybe an extra edge. Do you lean in on that in the lead-up?
I don't think we need to. I think it's if it's a little bit extra to what it normally is, there'll be more than 90,000 there. That's for sure. Yeah. So I can still formed my football childhood Hawthorn Essendon rivalries. And I think anything that can renew those days of the 80s and the modern day rivalry, and there've been everything in between. So I don't think we need any extra spice.
The captaincy change happened in December. Tell us about how Andy McGrath's taken that position on.
Yeah, Andy's a pretty complete person, not just a complete footballer. He's an exceptional leader, and personally I have a philosophy that your captaincy and leadership more generally, but your captaincy, it's good to have progression there and a little bit of forward planning for who's going to be the successor to the current captain. It almost starts pretty much the day the next captain is appointed, and we were really well served by Dyson Heppel for a long period of time, but really quickly the transition from Dyson to Zach took place, and it's I know everyone will have the view about the off season, but the natural progression from Zach to Andy has probably been in place for 18 months or so now. So it's been pretty seamless for us, and Andy brings a really nice balance to his leadership, and I think he'll be a fantastic captain. But I think it's the best of both worlds for us, because we're not going to lose any of what Zach brings to the leadership that he plays within our club. But also it's going to probably enable Zach to focus even more on his own individual game without the burden of having to constantly think about what he needs to do for the team off field. He can just lock in and focus on what he needs to do to be the best player he can. I
know you speak to players a lot around the capability of themselves, but also of the team. What do you think the capability of Essendon is this year?
Yeah, I'm optimistic about what our best looks like, because I watched Darcy Parish train through the pre-season and think, whether it's been at Essendon or as an external observer before I came here, I haven't seen him train like that or play like that since 2021, which was an All-Australian year for him. So that's an instant upside for us, and a number of players fit into that category too in terms of the guys we haven't seen much of. So I think, like most teams, at our best we'll be capable, but we're going to have some just obvious factual challenges in terms of how quickly can we get our 18-year-olds to step up to the level of elite AFL football.
Let's talk about the rehab room. Isaac Kako, hamstring injury last week. How's he and Jordan Ridley placed for the start of the season?
Yeah, both pretty good. Jordan is right on track. Goes without saying we're being very conservative with him just because of his history, but I mean, there's a case to say that Rids could be playing this week. So we expect him to be right for round one. Cac, pretty minor injury, but a young player that we just want to take almost day by day. And I know everyone wants an injury update, and trust me, so do I. But with him, we'll just treat him symptomatically, and we're still very optimistic he'll be there round one. But if he's not there round one, it'll be soon after.
What about, there's unfortunately a few members of the ACL club from last year, but Nick Bryan, Tom Edwards, Lewis Hayes, when do you expect Nick Bryan in particular to be available?
Yeah, probably somewhere in the range of round 5 or 6. Comes into that, pretty much that exact 12-month period. So, I mean, if you think about back to last year when we just lost them, round 2, round 3, round 4, round 5, it'll probably stagger like that in terms of getting them back. But yeah, that has been the challenge that we always knew we faced coming into this year, that we'd have that carryover of injuries from last year. But on the positive side, everyone who has been available has had a good block.
You mentioned Lockie Blackiston earlier. Is he ready to take the run of that number 1 ruck role? And how disappointed was the club to lose Sam Draper last off-season?
Yeah, Black is a fairly unique player. We probably haven't seen him play his best position much. He played a little bit of ruck last year, but not a great deal, given we needed him in the back half. But we think that with Brian's return, it'll create a challenge for spots. Vigo Vicentini is developing very nicely, and so we do have some ruck options. And I think if you look across the competition, there are a lot of clubs that the depth chart isn't that deep in terms of the ruck positions, and I don't think anyone really knows exactly how it's going to play out with 5 on the bench. I mean, we and I have been quite public that we like the idea of playing 2 rucks if they're both capable. So the Bryan and Draper combination is a good example of that. So yeah, I mean, the short answer is we're not settled on our ruck setup yet, but we're pretty optimistic that we'll have some guys step up. And in terms of Drapes, I mean, it's disappointing to lose him, but we understand that the nature of free agency, and when you're a free agent, you can exercise your rights. And from the loss for us will be as much off field as on field, because Drapes is an energizer. He's a much loved, or he was a much loved member of our group, and he adds a point of difference to our playing group. So we certainly wish him well, just not against us.
Fair enough. Now, there's some players who we've seen bits and pieces of over the last couple of years: Caddy, Kako, May, Roberts, in different ways, Johnson last year as well. Who do you identify across the pre-season as being the guys who take the next step this season?
Well, we need a number of them to step up, and we've created opportunities for that to happen. I think Zach Merrett's the oldest player on our list. Cole Langford and Peter Wright are getting a bit of grief about being in their late 20s and the second and third oldest players on the list. So we've created opportunities through our list build for young players to step up, and certainly in the short term, we need some players to make the jump. And what we saw last year, whether it's Kako, Caddy, Roberts, Clark, Zach Johnson, a number of players got opportunity, but we think this year that there should be more competition for spots. So that should promote that healthy competition and have some of those guys jump up to the next level.
Do you think Sam Durham's ready to join the game's very best? He's 24, nearly at the 100-game mark. It feels like he's taken the responsibility over the past couple of seasons. Where do you see his game rising again?
Well, it'll just be a build on what he's already doing. I mean, he's if you talk about if you're trying to put together a prototypical modern day AFL midfielder, it'd look something like Sam Durham. So he's got a great combination of he's big and strong and super quick, great mix of speed and endurance as well. Great overhead, good at ground level. So I mean, he's a fairly complete player. But a lot's been asked of him over the last year or two. So I think he'll naturally and keep working on his game to improve. But I think the biggest improvement for him personally, ironically, will become, it'll come from the players that are around him. So getting Parrish back, Corbell back, I think that'll have a big boost for Sam.
And will there be any first gamers there next to him as well in round one? We've seen Dawson Sharp across pre-season look pretty ready, Jacob Farrow as well, and where's Sully Roby at in terms of his training return?
Yeah, Sully's pretty much back into, or progressing into full training. So he's not far away. And, our 4 other draftees have all had very impressive pre-seasons. So hard to speculate at the moment as to debutants, but, it's not making a big statement to say that, we expect all of our draftees to play at some point in 2026.
What about the hustler, Hussein Al-Ashkar? One of our favourites last year, watching him kick goal after goal. He's fitted in pretty seamlessly.
Yeah, I think we'll be talking. The challenge will be trying to create separate identities for Huss and for Isaac, because I think as a combination, that people are going to refer to them as a dynamic duo, and they combine really well together. But I've just been really impressed with Huss. Obviously known him for a long time, watched him really closely. Probably had some concerns about how quickly he jumped from junior footy to AFL footy, just given the demands of the game. But he's met the demands. So I think as a coaching group, we've been very pleasantly surprised as to how quickly he's been able to adapt.
How do you fit all the tools in the forward half? Because we've seen Nate Caddy, we expect him to take another step up this year. Cole Langford's there, fit hopefully across the year. Archer May showed some pretty good signs in terms of that second half of the season. There's Peter Wright. Have you got a group that you're pretty happy with at the moment? Have you got it settled in your own mind?
No, it's not. And Liam McMahon's the other one I'd put in that mix. That we'd be happy to have all of them available to pick from. Last year we for various stages we didn't have any of them. So what I've been really pleased with the forward half this year is that they've worked really well in combination. We've been able to change that combination. So we think there's 5 or 6 guys that can play certain roles for us as key forwards, and they're all a little bit different, but hopefully it gives us some versatility and, most importantly for us, some depth at selection.
The club put together a 3-year recruiting plan over the past couple of seasons and has followed that really diligently. 10 draftees over 2 seasons. Are you ready now to take the next step in terms of the attraction part of that plan, do you feel?
Yeah, it's probably the hardest bit, because you don't control your own destiny there. You can do everything you can to put yourself in the best position, but now that's the advantage of the draft. I mean, if you prepare well, you manage to obtain the picks, then you can draft whoever you want to draft. With trading free agency, you've got to be a club that shows players that it's an attractive destination. So that's certainly going to be the challenge for us in the short term. We can see it internally. I mean, I know the capability of a lot of our young players, but the best thing we can do to help our list management team is to show some signs on field that this is an attractive place to be, not just now but into the future.
There's already an aggressive move at the end of last year with Josh Weddle and the pursuit of him, a $10 million offer, which would be the biggest deal in club history. Are we going to see more of that? Yeah, not just with Josh Weddle specifically, but across the competition from an Essendon point of view.
Yep, but everyone will be doing the same thing. It started well before us, and it's a paradigm shift. And wherever you sit in the argument of equalisation, academies, father-sons, and everyone's got a different opinion, and usually that opinion's informed by the position they sit in.
What's your position?
Well, my position is when we've got a father-son and an academy player, I think they're great rules. But when we don't, I think they're terrible. I mean, clubs and coaches and list management teams are looking purely at what's right for them. But what I can say pretty confidently is that when you have the top end of the draft so heavily compromised, for clubs to attract top end talent, it's trading and free agency. And how do you attract them? Usually it's with very compelling offers. So it's not surprising to me that that's the way the competition's going. And there certainly is an element. Well, if you don't want to play that game, then you'll just get left behind.
Is it fair to say then Zach Bailey, Zach Butters, Ben King, all free agents will be right on the radar?
Yeah, they'll be all welcome here. I suspect it'll be a fairly competitive market.
Do you feel that the draft as an equalisation tool is as effective as it can be and should be?
Well, the real challenge with the draft is that, and it should be by definition, that the bottom clubs, the teams that finish down the bottom, get access to the best talent. But that hasn't happened over the last period of time. You've got, premiers, top 4 teams, acquiring top 2, 3, 4 talent in multiple years. So that when you stack really early high-end draftees into really good teams, it makes the really good teams better. When you take bottom teams and get a very early draft pick, it doesn't move the needle much in the short term. It might in the long term, but in the short term, it doesn't change much. So that's why you end up seeing this sort of situation where you've got the strong staying strong, if not getting stronger, and others getting not necessarily shut out of the draft, but I mean if we just look broadly at the competition, and I'm not in charge of making these decisions, but when you've got a premier and a top 6 team in Queensland acquiring 5 of the top 20 in the draft, that's what and again, that's why clubs get somewhat frustrated.
And you've got a father-son coming through next year who's pretty highly rated in Kobe Buick. How reluctant are you from a footy club point of view and Essendon point of view to see the rules shift too much to make it really difficult to match these top end players?
Well, you can't be hypocritical. I mean, you've either got to, and as I said, that you usually have the position, is informed by, the current situation that you're in. So, our club had a view that the changes should have happened earlier in terms of access to top end talent and the price you've got to pay to acquire father-sons and academy players. And it would be very hypocritical of us to change that view because we've got a father-son coming through ourselves.
Last one, Brad, we appreciate your time. Are you back into contact drills? Because last time we saw you at the best and fairest, you were winged. Have you got the green cap on? What's the situation with you? You're a victim of the injury crisis last year.
Yeah. At least I waited to the end of the season, Cal. But no, you won't see me in contact drills. I wouldn't be doing much damage anyway.
Thanks for the chat. Good luck to you.
Cheers.